there. Have you ever, stopped and wondered why you make some of the decisions you do? Well, today's deep dive is going to kind of help you understand just that. We're going to be exploring those fascinating and sometimes, honestly, frustrating mental shortcuts our brains take. They're called cognitive biases.
Yeah.
Buckle up because we're diving deep into a YouTube video. It's titled 21 Mind Traps, the ultimate guide to your most common thinking errors
Okay.
by escaping ordinary BC marks. And if you've ever read that Daniel Kahneman book, Thinking Fast and Slow, some of this might sound familiar, but trust me, there are some real gems in here waiting to be unearthed.
It's true. These biases, they often work behind the scenes,
Yeah.
influencing how we see the world and ultimately make choices without us even realizing it.
Okay, so let's jump right in with the first bias, survivorship bias. To illustrate this, let's rewind way back to World War II. Picture yourself on a team tasked with making bomber planes safer. The obvious solution, it seems to be, reinforcing the areas with the most bullet holes, right? I mean, that's where they're getting hit the most.
Yeah, that's exactly what the Navy researchers initially thought. They carefully studied the damage on returning planes, noticing clusters of bullet holes on the wings and fuselage.
But wait, there's a twist.
Uh-oh.
A brilliant mathematician, this guy named Abraham Wald, he pointed out a huge flaw in this logic. They were only looking at the planes that survived.
Right.
What about all the planes that didn't make it back,
Right.
The missing data told a different story. Maybe those missing planes were hidden, different spots entirely.
Exactly. Wald proposed a counterintuitive solution, reinforce the areas where the returning planes were not hit.
Oh.
His reasoning. The planes that took damage in those missing spots simply didn't survive to tell the tale.
So basically, those seemingly undamaged areas on the returning planes were actually the most critical points to protect.
Precisely. And this illustrates the heart of survivorship bias. We tend to focus on success stories, the survivors,
Right.
while overlooking the failures. This can lead us to make decisions based on a skewed understanding of risk. It's like assuming every restaurant is successful because you only see the ones that stay open.
Oh, that makes total sense. It's like looking at crumbling old buildings and thinking they don't make them like they used to.
Yeah.
We're only seeing the ones that survived the test of time, not the ones that, crumbled.
Right.
But how can we use this knowledge of survivorship bias to our advantage? When we're evaluating success stories, for example.
Great question. Being aware of this bias helps us approach information with a more critical eye. When you see a success story, ask yourself, what's the full picture? What about all the attempts that failed along the way? This can help you make more informed decisions and avoid the trap of thinking success is easier to achieve than it actually is.
So we need to remember there's a whole graveyard of failures lurking behind every success story. Now, let's shift gears to a pair of biases that often work hand in hand. Self-serving bias and the fundamental attribution error.
These two are all about how we explain our own actions versus the actions of others.
Okay.
We tend to be pretty generous when judging ourselves, but a bit harsher when judging others.
Okay, give me an example, something relatable,
Imagine you ace an exam.
Okay.
You're probably thinking, wow, I'm smart. I studied hard. But what happens if you fail?
Uh-oh.
Suddenly it's the teacher's fault, or the exam was unfair. This is classic self-serving bias.
Yeah.
Attributing our successes to internal factors and our failures to external factors.
It's so true. And how does that connect to the fundamental attribution error?
Well, while we're busy giving ourselves a break, we tend to judge others' actions based on their character. Simon is late to work. He must be lazy. But when you're late, it's because of traffic, right?
Okay. Right. It's like we hold others to a different standard. But wouldn't a little bit of self-serving bias be a good thing? Doesn't it help with motivation?
Yeah.
If I always blamed myself for everything, wouldn't that be a bit demotivating?
That's a valid point. Some level of self-serving bias can be healthy for our self-esteem. It's about finding the right balance.
Yeah.
We don't want to become completely blind to our own flaws, but we also don't want to be overly self-critical. The key is awareness. By recognizing these tendencies, we can strive for a more balanced and compassionate perspective when evaluating ourselves and others.
So a little self-awareness can go a long way. Now, those people who are suddenly experts after something happens?
Yeah.
Called it, I knew it all along. It's got to be another bias, right?
Absolutely. That's hindsight bias in action. Our brains tend to rewrite history, to fit the outcome, making it seem inevitable.
Yeah.
We conveniently forget our initial doubts and uncertainties, making the outcome seem obvious all along.
It's like our memory has a rewrite history button.
It does.
But how does this affect us in the real world?
Think about decision-making. Hindsight bias can make it difficult to learn from past mistakes. Let's say a CEO makes a risky business decision that leads to a negative outcome.
Right.
With hindsight bias, we judge the decision based on the outcome rather than the information available at the time the decision was made. It creates this illusion that the outcome was predictable, making it harder to objectively assess the quality of the decision itself.
So it's not just about saying I knew it all along. It's about how this bias distorts our perception of the entire decision-making process.
Right.
We need to be careful not to rewrite history in our mind.
Exactly. And that brings us to a bias that plays on our fears and anxieties. Availability bias.
Oh, okay.
You know that feeling when you see a news story about a plane crash and suddenly you're terrified of flying, even though statistically it's one of the safest ways to travel?
Oh, I'm totally guilty of that one. I avoid certain routes because I, remember a news story about an incident years ago.
I know.
But how does this bias work exactly?
Availability bias skews our risk perception based on the information that is most readily available to us.
Okay.
Vivid or recent events, especially those amplified by media coverage, dominate our thinking, even if the actual probability of those events is quite low. It's like judging the danger of sharks based solely on Jaws.
So a single news story can completely distort our perception of risk, even if statistically the risk is minimal. That's scary.
It is. And this is where the availability cascade comes in.
Right.
Let's say someone posts a video online about a minor product defect.
Okay.
It goes viral, sparking widespread fear and outrage, even if that defect was an isolated incident.
Right.
This initial spark can ignite a wildfire of public concern, leading to boycotts or policy changes that are completely disproportionate to the actual threat.
That makes perfect sense. So it's not just about the availability of information, but also about how that information spreads and gets amplified,
Right.
creating this self-sustaining cycle of fear and overreaction. It's like a snowball effect for anxieties.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of being critical consumers of information.
Yeah.
Just because something is easy to recall or widely circulated doesn't necessarily mean it reflects the true risk or prevalence of a particular event.
Okay, deep divers. Let's talk about a bias that can be a real drain on our time, energy, and even, our wallets. The sunk cost fallacy. You know that feeling like when you're halfway through a bad movie, but you just keep watching because, well, I've already invested an hour of my time. Or maybe you're in a relationship that's clearly not working, but you hesitate to end it because you've already put in so much effort.
Yeah, it's a common trap we all fall into from time to time. The sunk cost fallacy describes our tendency to cling to past investments, whether it's time, money, or effort,
Right.
even when the current situation is unfavorable. It's
Yeah.
like we're trying to justify those past investments by throwing good money after bad.
Yeah, it's like refusing to leave a concert even though, it's pouring rain because, hey, I already paid for the ticket and I waited in line for an hour. But logically, those past investments are gone, right?
Yeah,
There's no getting them back.
exactly. The rational approach is to focus on what will bring you the best outcome going forward, not on trying to recoup what's already lost. Think about it in terms of investing. Imagine you bought a stock that's now plummeting.
Uh-oh.
The sunk cost fallacy might tempt you to hold on to it, hoping it will eventually rebound, even if all signs point to further losses.
So instead of clinging to that losing stock, a more rational approach would be to cut your losses and invest in something with, better prospects.
Precisely. Don't let the ghost of past investments haunt your present decisions. It's about making choices based on what's best for your future, not on trying to salvage what's already gone.
I mean, this bias can really impact major life decisions, like sticking with a career path that's, no longer fulfilling just because you've already invested years of education and experience, or staying in a city that's no longer a good fit because you've built a life there.
Absolutely. Recognizing the sunk cost fallacy in these situations can be incredibly empowering.
Yeah.
It allows you to break free from the weight of past decisions and make choices that align with your current goals and values.
It's like giving yourself permission to start fresh, even if it means letting go of some past investments. Now let's talk about a bias that's all about presentation, the framing effect. You know how two products can be essentially the same,
Yeah.
but the way they're marketed makes all the difference.
Yeah.
Like 99% fat-free sounds so much more appealing than 1% fat,
Right.
even though they're technically the same thing.
That's a classic example of the framing effect.
Hmm.
It highlights how the way information is presented can significantly influence our choices, even if the underlying facts remain the same. We're often swayed by the positive framing, while the negative framing triggers an aversion.
It's like we're easily swayed by a bit of marketing magic, but are there any examples of the framing effect that go beyond just marketing?
Hmm.
Like, how does this bias play out in real-world scenarios?
Think about how choices are presented in everyday life. Imagine you're at a restaurant and the waiter asks, "Would you like to pay with cash or credit card?"
Okay.
That sounds neutral enough. But what if they said, "We offer a discount for cash payments," or "There's a surcharge for credit card transactions"?
Yeah, right.
The framing of the question suddenly shifts, influencing your decision.
So even subtle changes in wording can have a big impact on our choices.
Yeah.
That makes you wonder how much of our decision-making is truly objective.
Exactly. And this bias extends to more complex areas as well. Consider how doctors present surgery survival rates.
Okay.
90% survival rate sounds much more reassuring than 10% chance of death, even though they convey the same information.
Wow.
Or think about political campaigns. Politicians carefully frame issues to appeal to voters, often using emotionally charged language or highlighting certain statistics while downplaying others.
So it's like we're constantly bombarded with subtle framing tactics,
Right.
shaping our perceptions without us even realizing it.
Yeah.
That's a bit unsettling, to be honest.
It is, but the good news is that by understanding the framing effect, you can start to deconstruct the information presented to you. Look beyond the surface and try to identify the underlying facts, regardless of how they're packaged. Don't let clever framing dictate your choices.
So it's all about pausing and asking ourselves, is this information being presented in a way that's designed to nudge me towards a particular decision?
Right.
That's a great tip. Now, have you ever seen a face in a cloud or thought you spotted a pattern on Mars? Our brains are hardwired to see patterns even when they don't exist.
That's right. We're talking about the clustering illusion.
Okay.
Our brain's tendency to find patterns even in random data. It's a survival instinct that helped our ancestors identify predators or find food sources. But in the modern world, this tendency can sometimes lead us astray.
So that time I thought I saw a giant bunny rabbit in a cloud formation.
Yeah.
It's just my brain playing tricks on me.
Most likely.
Yep.
While the clustering illusion can be harmless in those situations, it can have real-world consequences, especially when dealing with data analysis or financial decisions.
Right.
Investors, for example, might see trends in stock charts where none exist, leading to risky decisions based on perceived patterns that are simply random fluctuations.
The video mentions a great example using a random string of X's and O's. Most people instinctively try to find order and meaning, even when it's just random chance. It's like our brains crave patterns,
Right.
even when they're not really there.
Exactly. So the next time you see a pattern, especially when dealing with complex systems like financial markets,
Yeah.
take a step back and ask yourself, is this a genuine pattern, or am I falling for the clustering illusion?
Right.
Looking for supporting evidence and considering alternative explanations can help you avoid making decisions based on illusory patterns.
It's like we need to be data detectives, carefully examining the evidence before, like jumping to conclusions.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about a concept that often boggles the mind, exponential growth.
Okay.
It's a bit counterintuitive because our brains are wired for like linear thinking.
You're absolutely right. To illustrate this, imagine folding a piece of paper in half,
Okay.
and then in half again,
Okay.
and so on, for 50 folds. How thick do you think the paper would be after 50 folds?
I guess maybe a few inches thick.
Not even close. It would be so thick that it could reach the sun from Earth.
Whoa, that's mind-blowing. I never would have guessed that. Why is exponential growth so difficult to grasp?
Our brains evolved to understand linear growth, which is much more predictable. If you walk for an hour, you'll cover a certain distance.
Right.
Walk for another hour, and you'll cover roughly the same distance.
Okay.
But exponential growth starts slowly and then accelerates rapidly. This type of growth wasn't common in our evolutionary past,
Right.
so our intuition struggles to keep up.
So our linear thinking brains are just not equipped to handle the sheer power of exponential growth.
Exactly. And this has huge implications in various fields, from finance to population growth to the spread of information online.
Right.
The video uses the analogy of a chessboard and rice. If you place 1 grain of rice on the first square, 2 on the second, 4 on the third, and so on, doubling the amount on each square,
Okay.
how much rice do you think you'd need to fill the entire chessboard?
Okay, that sounds like a lot of rice,
Yeah,
but I wouldn't even know where to begin calculating that.
it's an astronomical number. This illustrates how quickly exponential growth can spiral out of control, exceeding our intuitive grasp. But there's a handy tool called the Rule of 70 that can help us wrap our heads around this concept.
Oh, tell me more about this rule of 70. It sounds intriguing.
It's a simple way to approximate how long it takes for something to double. Let's say you have an investment with a 10% annual return. Divide 70 by 10 and you get 7. This means your investment will double in approximately 7 years. You can also use it to understand the impact of inflation. If inflation is at 8%, your money will lose half its value in about 8.7 years. 70 divided by 8.
So it's a quick and easy way to estimate doubling time, whether we're talking about investments, population growth, or even, I guess, the spread of a viral video online.
Exactly. The Rule of 70 is a powerful tool for understanding the long-term implications of growth rates. It helps us move beyond our linear instincts and grasp the potential of exponential growth, both positive and negative.
It's like a secret code for unlocking the mysteries of compounding. Now let's dive into a bias that explains why we're so fascinated by personality tests, horoscopes, and even like psychic readings, the Barnum effect.
Ah, yes, the Barnum effect. This one is all about how easily we accept vague, generalized descriptions as uniquely applicable to ourselves,
Yeah.
even though they could describe almost anyone.
Okay, so you're saying that those online quizzes that tell me I'm a creative individual with a thirst for adventure are not actually revealing some hidden truth about my personality.
Not necessarily.
Right.
While some personality assessments can be insightful, the Barnum effect highlights how easily we can be swayed by statements that are intentionally vague, broadly appealing. Think about horoscopes.
Okay.
They often use language that's general enough to resonate with a wide audience.
Right.
You're feeling a bit restless this week and craving new experiences.
Yeah.
Who doesn't feel that way from time to time?
So it's not that horoscopes are necessarily wrong. It's
Yeah.
that they're often so vague that they could apply to almost anyone. But why are we so susceptible to these types of statements?
Our brains are constantly searching for meaning and patterns.
Yeah.
We crave self-understanding and validation. So when we encounter a description that seems to resonate with us,
Yeah.
even if it's vague and generalized,
Right.
we tend to latch onto it and see it as uniquely insightful.
It's like our brains are filling in the blanks,
Right.
making those vague statements feel more personal and meaningful than they actually are.
Exactly. And the video mentions a fascinating experiment that demonstrates this effect.
Okay.
Back in 1948, a psychologist named Bertram Forer gave participants a personality test
Okay.
and then provided them with identical, generalized feedback taken from astrology magazines.
Wow.
The results. A whopping 86% of the participants felt that the description accurately reflected their personality.
Wow. 86%. That's incredible. So even when people know they're receiving generic feedback, the Barnum effect can still take hold.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It highlights how powerful this bias can be.
Wow.
So the next time you're tempted to take an online personality test or read your horoscope, remember the Barnum effect. Those vague statements are designed to appeal to a broad audience,
Right.
not to reveal unique insights about your personality.
It's a good reminder to be skeptical of those one-size-fits-all personality assessments. Now, I'm curious, is there a flip side to the Barnum effect, like a bias where we underestimate the commonalities we share with others?
That's an interesting question. While there isn't a formally recognized bias with that specific name,
Right.
there are certainly cognitive tendencies that can lead us to overestimate our uniqueness and underestimate the extent to which our thoughts, feelings, and experiences are shared by others.
That makes sense. It's like we all want to believe we're special snowflakes, even though we're all part of the same human experience. Speaking of shared experiences, I think it's safe to say we've all encountered that frustrating situation where we stick with something way longer than we should have.
Yeah.
Whether it's a project, a purchase, or even a relationship,
Yeah.
we sometimes find ourselves clinging to things even when they're clearly not working.
Yes, the sunk cost fallacy strikes again.
Oh, no.
It's a pervasive bias that can trap us in all sorts of unproductive situations. We've already discussed how it can influence financial decisions, but its reach extends far beyond the realm of money.
So how does this bias play out in our personal lives? Like, why do we sometimes stay in relationships that are clearly no longer serving us?
Well, imagine you've been in a relationship for several years. You've invested time, emotional energy, and maybe even shared finances and living arrangements.
Yeah.
Ending the relationship would mean acknowledging that all that investment was, in a sense, wasted.
It's like we're trying to protect our ego
Right.
by clinging to the past. But is that really a rational approach?
Not really. The sunk cost fallacy can trap us in a cycle of unhappiness and prevent us from pursuing healthier, more fulfilling relationships. It's important to remember that those past investments are sunk costs. They're gone. The rational decision is to focus on what will bring you happiness and fulfillment going forward, not on trying to salvage what's already lost.
It's like that saying, don't cling to a mistake just because you spent a lot of time making it. So how can we overcome the sunk cost fallacy in our personal lives?
It starts with recognizing the bias when it's happening. Ask yourself, am I staying in this situation because it's truly what I want? Or am I afraid of letting go of past investments?
Right.
It can also be helpful to reframe your thinking. Instead of focusing on what you've lost, consider what you stand to gain by moving on.
So it's about shifting our perspective from a mindset of loss to a mindset of opportunity.
Yeah.
Instead of dwelling on the past, we should focus on the potential for a brighter future.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that sometimes the bravest and most loving thing we can do for ourselves is to let go of what's no longer serving us, even if it means acknowledging past investments that didn't pan out.
It's about choosing happiness and growth over clinging to a past that's no longer aligned with our present selves. Now let's shift gears and explore a bias that's all about persuasion and influence, the framing effect.
The framing effect is a fascinating example of how subtle changes in wording or presentation can dramatically alter our perceptions and influence our choices.
Okay, give me an example, something that illustrates how this bias works in the real world.
Imagine you're considering buying a new car. A salesperson might say, "This car has a spacious interior and luxurious features." That sounds pretty appealing, right? But what if they said, "This car has poor fuel economy and a high sticker price"? Suddenly, the same car seems less desirable, even though the features haven't changed.
So it's not just about what's being said, but how it's being said.
Exactly.
The same information can be spun in a positive or negative light depending on the desired outcome.
Exactly. And this bias is widely used in advertising and marketing.
Right.
Products are often framed in terms of their benefits, while potential drawbacks are downplayed or omitted entirely.
It's like we're constantly being bombarded with carefully crafted messages designed to sway our opinions and influence our purchasing decisions. Is there any way to protect ourselves from this type of manipulation?
The key is to become aware of the framing effect
Right.
and to develop a critical eye for persuasive language. When you encounter a message that seems designed to influence your choices, pause and ask yourself, what are the underlying facts? Are there any alternative perspectives that are not being presented?
So it's about looking beyond the surface and digging deeper to uncover the full story.
Exactly.
We need to be savvy consumers of information, recognizing that not everything is as it seems.
Absolutely. By understanding the framing effect, you can become more discerning in your decision-making, avoiding choices that are driven by clever framing rather than by your true needs and values.
It's like developing a mental filter that helps us separate the persuasive fluff from the factual substance. Now let's delve into a bias that can make us see patterns where none exist. The clustering illusion.
The clustering illusion highlights our innate tendency to perceive patterns in random data.
Okay.
Our brains are constantly searching for order and meaning, even when it's not really there.
So that time I thought I saw a message from the universe hidden in a spilled cup of coffee.
Yeah,
It was just my clustering illusion running wild.
most likely. While finding patterns can be useful in many situations, the clustering illusion can lead us to make faulty assumptions and draw incorrect conclusions.
Okay.
The video uses a great example involving a random sequence of coin flips. Even though the outcome of each flip is completely independent of the previous one,
Right.
we tend to see streaks and patterns, convincing ourselves that there's some underlying force at work.
Exactly. And this bias can have real-world consequences, especially when it comes to, like, analyzing data.
Right.
For example, a basketball player might hit a few shots in a row,
Right.
leading fans to believe, like, they're on fire. But statistically, each shot is an independent event, and the perceived hot streak might just be random chance.
Exactly.
So it's like we're imposing order onto chaos, trying to make sense of the world, even when it's inherently random. But how can we overcome the clustering illusion and make more rational judgments?
The key is to be aware of this bias and to approach data analysis with a healthy dose of skepticism. When you see a pattern, ask yourself, is this a genuine pattern, or am I simply seeing what I want to see? Looking for supporting evidence and considering alternative explanations can help you avoid making decisions based on illusory patterns.
So it's about resisting the temptation to jump to conclusions and instead seeking out a more nuanced understanding of the data. Now let's talk about a concept that can be mind-boggling: exponential growth.
Okay.
It's something we often underestimate because our brains are wired for, like, linear thinking.
You're absolutely right. Exponential growth starts slowly and then accelerates rapidly, making it difficult for our linear thinking brains to grasp its true power. The video uses a fascinating analogy involving a chessboard and rice. If you place 1 grain of rice on the first square, 2 on the second, 4 on the third, and so on, doubling the amount on each square,
Okay.
you'll end up with a staggering amount of rice.
Yeah, it's a mind-blowing illustration of how quickly exponential growth can spiral out of control. We start with a seemingly insignificant amount, but with each doubling, the quantity grows exponentially, eventually exceeding our ability to comprehend its magnitude. It's like a snowball rolling down a hill, gathering more and more snow as it goes, quickly transforming from a small, manageable ball into an unstoppable force. But why do we struggle so much to grasp this concept?
Our brains evolved to understand linear growth,
Right.
which is much more predictable. If you walk for an hour, you'll cover a certain distance. Walk for another hour, and you'll cover roughly the same distance.
Right.
But exponential growth doesn't follow that pattern.
Okay.
It starts slowly, lulling us into a false sense of security, and then explodes with astonishing speed.
So our linear thinking brains just aren't equipped to handle the sheer power of exponential growth.
Exactly. And this has profound implications in various fields, from finance to population growth to the spread of information online. The video highlights a handy tool called the Rule of 70 that can help us wrap our heads around this concept.
Oh, tell me more about this Rule of 70. It sounds like a valuable tool for understanding this complex concept.
It's a simple way to approximate how long it takes for something to double. Let's say you have an investment with a 10% annual return. Divide 70 by 10 and you get 7.
Okay.
This means your investment will double in approximately 7 years. You can also use it to understand the impact of inflation. If inflation is at 8%, your money will lose half its value in about 8.7 years, 70 divided by 8.
So it's a quick and easy way to estimate doubling time, whether we're talking about investments, population growth, or even, I guess, the spread of a viral video online.
Exactly. The Rule of 70 is a powerful tool for understanding the long-term implications of growth rates. It helps us move beyond our linear instincts and grasp the potential of exponential growth, both positive and negative.
It's like a secret code for unlocking the mysteries of compounding. Now let's explore a bias that can make us susceptible to vague personality descriptions, horoscopes, and even like psychic readings, the Barnum effect.
Ah, yes, the Barnum effect. This one is all about how easily we accept vague, generalized descriptions as uniquely applicable to ourselves,
Right.
even though they could describe almost anyone.
Okay, so you're saying that those online quizzes that tell me I'm a creative individual with a thirst for adventure are not actually revealing some hidden truth about my personality.
Not necessarily. While some personality assessments can be insightful, the Barnum effect highlights how easily we can be swayed by statements that are intentionally vague and broadly appealing. Think about horoscopes. They often use language that's general enough to resonate with a wide audience. You're feeling a bit restless this week and craving new experiences. Who doesn't feel that way from time to time?
So it's not that horoscopes are necessarily wrong.
Right.
It's that they're often so vague that they could apply to almost anyone.
Yeah.
But why are we so susceptible to these types of statements?
Our brains are constantly searching for meaning and patterns. We crave self-understanding and validation. So when we encounter a description that seems to resonate with us, even if it's vague and generalized, we tend to latch onto it and see it as uniquely insightful.
It's like our brains are filling in the blanks, making those vague statements feel more personal and meaningful than they actually are.
Exactly. And the video mentions a fascinating experiment that demonstrates this effect. Back in 1948, a psychologist named Bertram Forer gave participants a personality test and then provided them with identical generalized feedback taken from astrology magazines. The results: A whopping 86% of the participants felt that the description accurately reflected their personality.
Wow, 86%. That's incredible. So even when people know they're receiving generic feedback,
Yeah,
the Barnum effect can still take hold.
absolutely. It highlights how powerful this bias can be. So the next time you're tempted to take an online personality test or read your horoscope,
Right.
remember the Barnum effect.
Okay.
Those vague statements are designed to appeal to a broad audience, not to reveal unique insights about your personality.
It's a good reminder to be skeptical of those one-size-fits-all personality assessments. Now, I'm curious, is there a flip side to the Barnum effect, like a bias where we underestimate the commonalities we share with others?
That's an interesting question. While there isn't a formally recognized bias with that specific name, there are certainly cognitive tendencies that can lead us to overestimate our uniqueness and underestimate the extent to which our thoughts, feelings, and experiences are shared by others.
And that makes sense. It's like we all want to believe we're special snowflakes, even though we're all part of the same human experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, wow, this deep dive into cognitive biases has been a real eye-opener, honestly.
Yeah,
It's amazing how these mental shortcuts can shape our perceptions and influence our decisions without us even realizing it.
it's true. These biases are like hidden forces shaping our thoughts and actions.
Yeah.
But the good news is that by becoming aware of them,
Right.
we can start to de-bias our thinking and make more intentional choices.
So it's not about eliminating these biases entirely. I mean, they're like wired into our brains, but it's about recognizing when they might be at play
Right.
and taking steps to mitigate their influence. What are some practical things we can do to become more aware of our own biases?
One simple yet powerful strategy is to pause and reflect before making important decisions.
Okay.
Ask yourself, what information am I basing this decision on? Could any cognitive biases be skewing my perception?
So it's about taking a step back and examining our thought process more critically.
Right.
We need to become more like mental detectives, scrutinizing the evidence and challenging our assumptions.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that this is an ongoing process.
Mm,
There are many cognitive biases out there, and we're all susceptible to them in different ways.
yeah.
The more we learn about these biases, the more we can sharpen our critical thinking skills and make choices that are aligned with our true goals and values.
Mm. It's like we're constantly calibrating our mental compass, becoming more aware of the subtle forces that can, steer us off course.
Yeah.
Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one key takeaway you'd like listeners to remember?
I'd say the most important takeaway is that cognitive biases are not inherently good or bad.
Okay.
They're simply mental shortcuts that have evolved over time to help us navigate a complex world. The key is to understand how these biases can influence our thinking
Right.
and to develop strategies for mitigating their negative effects.
So it's about harnessing the power of these mental shortcuts while also being mindful of their potential pitfalls. This deep dive has given us a valuable toolkit for navigating the world with more awareness and intentionality.
Exactly. And remember, this is just the beginning of the journey. There's always more to learn about ourselves and the fascinating ways our minds work. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Well said. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and empowered you to think more critically about the world around you. Until next time, happy thinking.